Good morning, everyone, and happy Tuesday. Back here this week for our first read aloud of the week. Before we start our read aloud, I want to kind of talk to you guys a little bit about why February is so special. So, some of you might already know this, but some of you might not. February is called is a time that we celebrate Black History Month. And if you don't know what Black History Month is, it's the whole month of February. And during this time, we celebrate and we honor and remember famous African Americans who did things in the past, okay, that can be remembered. So, our stories this week are actually going to be about some famous African Americans from the past and why we kind of celebrate them and remember them and honor them. So, our book today is called Henry's Freedom Box, and Henry is or was a slave back in the 1800s. And so, you're going to learn about Henry and you're going to learn about some things that involve freedom and slavery and some journeys that Henry has to take. And some of this stuff might be new to you. You might not have ever heard things about Black history before. But this week and next week and all throughout February, we're going to be celebrating Black History Month and learning more about the famous African Americans from the past and what they did and how that affects us today. Okay, so as I'm reading, I want you to be thinking about why Henry is famous. Okay, and before we get started with the story, I'm going to show you what your writing assignment is this week for this Henry's Freedom Box book. So you actually have 3 different questions you're going to answer at the end of this story. So the first one says, what do you think the word freedom means? Okay, I want to know what you think the word freedom means. I don't want you to go look it up anywhere. Just tell me, if you hear the word freedom, what does that mean? What do you think of when you hear the word freedom? So that's your first question. Your second question comes over here in this box, and it says, most slaves did not know their birthday. Why did Henry consider March 30th, 1847 his birthday? Okay, you'll learn more about that in the story. So that's the second thing that you're going to type out. And this third one is very, very important, and it allows you to give your opinion. Okay, so the third one says, do you think that you would have enough courage to take the journey to freedom? Why or why not? So these questions and these writing assignments kind of give you a little hint as to what our book, Henry's Freedom Box, is going to be about today. So after we read the story, I want you to come back and fill out these 3 questions. Make sure that your sentences have at least 7 words in each of them. They should start with a capital letter and end with punctuation. And just try your very best with spelling. All right, so let's move on over to our story today. Henry's Freedom Box. And it's a true story from the Underground Railroad. All right. Henry Brown wasn't sure how old he was. Henry was a slave, and slaves weren't allowed to know their birthdays. So let's think about that. Think about if you weren't allowed to know your birthday. How would you feel? And how do you think Henry feels? And more importantly, why? Why were slaves not allowed to know their birthday? Henry and his brothers and sisters worked in the big house where the master lived. Henry's master had been good to Henry and his family, but Henry's mother knew things could change. Do you see those leaves blowing in the wind? They are torn from the trees like slave children are torn from their families. One morning, the master called for Henry and his mother. They climbed the wide staircase. The master lay in bed with only his head above the quilt. He was very ill. He beckoned them to come closer. Some slaves were freed by their owners. Henry's heart beat fast. Maybe the master would set him free. But the master said, "You are a good worker, Henry. I am giving you to my son. You must obey him and never tell a lie." Henry nodded, but he didn't say thank you. That would have been a lie. Later that day, Henry watched a bird soar high above the trees. Free bird, happy bird, Henry thought. Henry said goodbye to his family. He looked across the field. The leaves swirled in the wind. Henry worked in his new master's factory. He was good at his job. "Do not tear that tobacco leaf," the boss yelled at the new boy. He poked the boy with a stick. If you made a mistake, the boss would beat you. Henry was lonely. One day he met Nancy, who was shopping for her mistress. They walked and talked and agreed to meet again. Henry felt like singing, but slaves didn't dare sing in the streets. Instead, he hummed all the way home. Months later, Henry asked Nancy to be his wife. When both their masters agreed, Henry and Nancy were married. Soon there was a little baby, then another, and another. Henry knew they were very lucky. They lived together, and even though they had different masters. But Nancy was worried. Her master had lost a great deal of money. "I'm afraid he will sell our children," she said. Henry sat very still. Henry worked hard all morning. He tried to forget what Nancy had said. So I'm going to pause here for a second. I want you to think about Henry's life so far. Do you think that he's had a good life or a bad life, and why? I want you to think about that for a second. I also want you to think about, why did Henry try to forget what his wife said? Why do you think he tried to forget that while he was working? His friend James came into the factory. He whispered to Henry, "Your wife and children were just sold at the slave market." "No!" cried Henry. Henry couldn't move. He couldn't think. He couldn't work. "Twist that tobacco!" The boss poked Henry. Henry twisted tobacco leaves. His heart twisted in his chest. So let's think about this. Henry is hard at work in the factory, and he just finds out that his wife and children have all been sold. What that means is that he's not going to see them again. They've been separated. How do you think he's feeling? And how does that make you feel? At lunchtime, Henry rushed to the center of town. A large group of slaves was tied together. The owner shouted at them. Henry looked for his family. "Father, father!" Henry watched his children disappear down the road. Where was Nancy? He saw her the same moment she saw him. When he wiped away his tears, Nancy, too, was gone. Henry no longer sang. He couldn't hum. He went to work, and at night he ate supper and went to bed. Henry tried to think of happy times, but all he could see were the carts carrying away everyone he loved. Henry knew he would never see his family again. Many weeks passed. One morning, Henry heard singing. A little bird flew out of a tree into the open sky, and Henry thought about being free. But how? As he lifted a crate, he knew the answer. He asked James and Dr. Smith to help him. Dr. Smith was a white man who thought slavery was wrong. They met early the next day at an empty warehouse. Henry arrived with a box. Okay, I'm going to pause here for a second. Let's think back to the title, Henry's Freedom Box. And Henry said that he has an idea, and he's asked some friends for help. How do you think Henry plans to go? How do you think he plans to escape? What do you think he plans to do? All right, let's keep going. I will mail myself in a box where there are no slaves, he said. James stared at the box, then at Henry. What if you cough and someone hears you? I will cover my mouth and hope, Henry said. Dr. Smith wrote on the box, to William H. Johnson, Arch Street, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Henry would be delivered to friends in Pennsylvania. Then he printed on the crate in big letters, this side up with care. Why do you think Henry needs Dr. Smith's help? I want you to take a really close look at the illustration. Take a close look at his hand. This is Dr. Smith. Okay? This is Henry. Dr. Smith, Henry. Why do you think Henry needs the help of Dr. Smith? Henry needed an excuse to stay home, or the work boss would think he had run off. James pointed to Henry's sore finger, but Henry knew it wasn't bad enough. He opened a bottle of oil, of vitriol. No, cried James. Henry poured it on his hand. It burned his skin to the bone. Now the boss would have to let him stay home. Dr. Smith bandaged Henry's hand. They arranged to meet the next morning at 4 o'clock. All right, so let's pause again here. So Henry has said he's going to mail himself in this box, okay? So he is a full-grown person in this little tiny box. He can't make a sound. He can't make a move because he's hiding, okay? I want you to think about his journey. Think about what obstacles and what harsh things he might have to endure while in that box. Remember, he can't move. He can't make a sound. How do you think this journey is going to be for Henry? And why do you think he wants to do it? It's dangerous, it's long, it's not going to be a fun journey. But why does Henry want to do it? The sun was not yet up when Henry climbed into the box. Ready, he said. James mailed down the lid. Dr. Smith and James drove to the station. The railway clerk tipped the box over and nailed a paper to the bottom. Dr. Smith begged the clerks to be careful, but they didn't listen. They threw the box into the baggage car. Hours passed. Henry was lifted up and thrown again, upside down. He heard waves splashing. This must be the steamboat headed for Washington, D.C. The ship rode smoothly, but Henry was still upside down. Blood rushed to his head. His face got hot. His eyes ached. He thought his head would burst, but he was afraid to move. Someone might hear him. So I want you to take a look at this illustration. How can you tell that Henry is probably suffering right now? And how do you think he's suffering? I'm tired of standing, someone said. Why don't we move that box and sit on it, said another. Henry held his breath. Could they be talking about his box? Henry was pushed. The box scraped the deck. Now he was on his right side. Now on his left. And suddenly, right side up. What do you notice about Henry's box? This is how it started. Then it went here, then to here, and finally right side up. "What do you think is in here?" said the first man. "Mail, I guess," said the other. I am mail, Henry thought, but not the kind they imagine. Henry was carried off the steamboat and placed in a railroad car, this time head up. He fell asleep to the rattling song of the train wheels. Okay, so he's still inside the box. Let's think for a second. At one point, it said, Henry thought, I am male. What do you think he means by that? What do you think Henry means when he says, I am male? He awoke to loud knocking. Henry, are you all right in there? All right, he answered. The cover was pried open. Henry stretched and stood up. 4 men smiled at him. Welcome to Philadelphia. At last, Henry had a birthday, March 30th, 1849, his first day of freedom. And from that day on, he also had a middle name. Everyone called him Henry Box Brown. And that is the end of our story today. Henry's Freedom Box. So I want you to take a second here to pause and really reflect on this story. Remember, we're thinking this week and this month about famous African Americans and why they're famous and why we remember and honor them. Henry is one of those famous African Americans that we honor, remember, and talk about during Black History Month. So what I want to know is why? Why is Henry so special? Why do people call him Henry Box Brown? And why should we remember him? Okay. I also want you to think about that last page, the date. Okay. Think about Henry's birthday, March 30th, 1849. Was that his real birthday? And if not, why does he consider it his birthday? Okay, let's move on over to our writing, and I'll remind you guys the 3 questions you're going to be answering. So number 1, what do you think the word freedom means? In a complete sentence, you are going to tell me what you think freedom means. Okay, that's number 1. The second part says most slaves did not know their birthday. Why did Henry consider March 30th, 1847 his birthday? Okay, that's number 2. And number 3, do you think you would have enough courage to take the journey to freedom? So put yourself in Henry's shoes. Do you think you would be able to do what Henry did? So you're going to tell me yes or no, you would be able to do it? You would have enough courage? Or no, I wouldn't have enough courage to do that. And then you're going to explain why. All right. If at any point while you're answering these questions, you need to go back into the story, you can do that on slide 1. Okay. Good luck. If you need help, just reach out to me on Google Classroom or on Class Dojo, and I'd be happy to help you. And I will see you guys again on Thursday to learn about another famous African American. Have a great day.